They kicked my door in at 5:47 a.m. like I was a wanted felon. 5 HOA board members, 2 armed guards, and diamond-dripping President Vivian screaming I was illegally occupying the lake. I'm Jasper. 3 months ago, I inherited Grandpa's cabin. They hit me with a $4,800 dock fee. Pay up or lose everything. Neighbors are suffering. 82-year-old Dolores skips heart meds to pay. Single mom Sarah works double night shifts and still falls behind. Vivian flaunts bracelets worth more than the whole block's pay, bought with our money. They got right in my face and yelled, "Who controls these docks?" I looked them dead in the eye and answered calmly. Everyone froze. Guns lowered. Clipboards dropped. Dead silence. One sentence, and their entire scam collapsed. What would you do if an HOA squad raided your house? Drop your location plus craziest HOA horror story below. I read every one. Best gets featured next. 3 months earlier, I inherited what everyone called Crazy Ezekiel's cabin. The old cedar shack smelled like decades of pipe tobacco and motor oil seeping into weathered floorboards. Every surface buried under maps, surveys, and manila folders stuffed with documents dating back to the 1800s. Mom always said Grandpa was the town pack rat. Turns out he was also the neighborhood's best-kept secret. I'm Jasper Thornfield, Marine Corps veteran, recently unemployed after the factory closure. This cabin was supposed to be my fresh start. Instead, it became a war zone. Day 1, I'm hauling trash bags when heels start clicking on my dock like machine gun fire. The sound cut through morning mist sharp enough to make my teeth ache. You must be Ezekiel's grandson. The woman approaching looked like she'd stepped out of a real estate magazine. Perfect blonde hair, designer blazer, and a clipboard gripped like a weapon. I'm Vivian Blackwell, HOA president, no handshake, no condolences, straight to business. Your grandfather owed 15 years of dock fees, $4,800. Payment due Friday or we seize the boat. I stared at her. Dock fees for what? Community waterfront management, $300 monthly per household. Everyone pays. Her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. No exceptions. Here's a fun fact about HOAs. They can only charge fees for services they actually provide. If there's no maintenance, there should be no fees. Period. That's when I noticed my neighbor Dolores watching from her kitchen window. Sweet 82-year-old woman who used to bring Grandpa soup when he was sick. She looked terrified. Over the next 3 months, I learned why. Vivian ran Millbrook Shores like her personal kingdom. Miss a payment? Late fees? Question her authority? Harassment campaigns. Every board meeting was her show. Every decision benefited her real estate business. Sarah, the single mom across the cove, worked double night shifts just to make dock fees. Her teenager Marcus, kid's a computer wizard, told me his mom cried doing bills every month. But they couldn't move. Sarah's ex wasn't paying support, and this was the only place they could afford. Dolores was worse. Heart condition, fixed income, choosing between medications and Vivian's assessments. I'd catch her sitting on her dock, staring at the water like she was saying goodbye. Meanwhile, Vivian drove a different luxury car every month. New jewelry at every HOA meeting. European vacation photos plastered on Facebook while neighbors struggled. Honestly, watching her flaunt stolen money while elderly folks skipped meals was like watching someone kick puppies for sport. Where's all this fee money actually going? I asked at my first board meeting. Maintenance and improvements, she snapped. The community pier, insurance, administrative costs. But I'd walked every inch of shoreline. The community pier was rotting, no improvements anywhere. The rough texture of splintered dock planks told the real story. Zero maintenance despite collecting over 70 grand annually. Week 6, she escalated. Anonymous complaints to county about my unsafe structure. Suddenly I needed permits for everything. Dock repairs, boat storage, even cleaning windows. Each permit cost hundreds, with Vivian's real estate buddy rubber stamping approvals. Week 10, personal attacks started. Neighborhood newsletter articles about undesirable elements and maintaining property standards. Photos of my truck with commentary about eyesore vehicles. The smell of her diesel Range Rover became my alarm clock. She'd circle the lake every morning at dawn, hunting for violations. That toxic exhaust mixing with clean lake air became the scent of approaching harassment. By month 3, I understood Grandpa's obsession with those old documents. He wasn't hoarding. He was researching. Every deed, every survey, every historical record carefully preserved and cross-referenced. And buried in that collection, I'd found something interesting, something about water rights and original land grants that made my pulse quicken. But Vivian must have sensed I was getting close, because yesterday she'd called an emergency meeting about my continued violations. That's why she showed up this morning with armed guards. Final ultimatum. Big mistake. The week after that first confrontation, Vivian launched her opening attack. I was replacing rotted dock planks when County Inspector Rudy Flemons rolled up in his truck, clipboard in hand and a look on his face like he'd rather be anywhere else. The metallic scrape of his tailgate dropping echoed across the still water. "Sorry to bother you, Mr. Thornfield. Got a complaint about structural safety concerns." He avoided eye contact. "Need to do an inspection." Funny thing about Rudy, he'd been Grandpa's fishing buddy for 20 years. Used to sit right here on this dock every Saturday morning, sharing coffee and swapping war stories. But now he was shuffling around like the planks might collapse under his boots, poking at perfectly solid support beams. "Rudy, this dock's been here since 1987. Grandpa built it himself with marine-grade lumber." I know. But regulations change, you understand." He scribbled notes without really looking. "New safety standards, insurance requirements." The smell of fresh coffee drifted from Dolores's kitchen, mixing with diesel fumes from Rudy's idling truck. Morning loons called across the water, but their voices seemed muted, like the whole lake was holding its breath. That's when I noticed Vivian's Range Rover parked at the boat launch, windows down, clearly within earshot. Something clicked. During my first week cleaning out Grandpa's cabin, I'd found a folder labeled County Personnel stuffed with business cards, certifications, and correspondence. The old man had researched everyone who'd ever set foot on his property. Smart habit I was starting to appreciate. "Rudy, quick question. When did you get your marine structural certification?" He froze mid-poke at a dock cleat. "My what?" "Marine structural certification, the specialized training for inspecting waterfront constructions." I'd remembered reading about this exact requirement in one of Grandpa's regulatory research folders. State law requires specific credentials for dock safety inspections. The color drained from Rudy's face faster than lake water through a broken dam. "Well, that is, because if someone's conducting unauthorized inspections without proper certification, that's actually a state violation. Could affect the validity of any citations they issue." Vivian's car door slammed. Her heels clicked rapid fire across the boat launch parking lot toward her escape route. Rudy packed up his gear like the dock had suddenly caught fire. "I'll need to review the regulations and get back to you." "Take your time. I'll be calling the state licensing board to verify inspection protocols." He was in his truck and gone before I finished the sentence. Gravel spraying under his tires like he was fleeing a crime scene. The acrid smell of burning rubber mixed with morning lake mist. That afternoon, I dove deeper into Grandpa's archives. The old man had been methodical. Every interaction with county officials documented, every regulation researched, every certification verified. It was like he'd been preparing for war. In a folder marked Water Rights Research, I found hand-drawn maps of the lake bottom, surveys dating back to the 1890s, and correspondence with the State Historical Society. The rough texture of century-old paper revealed careful notes in Grandpa's spidery handwriting. Original dam construction, 1892. Creek damming required riparian rights purchase. Check courthouse records. Grandpa hadn't been randomly hoarding documents. He'd been building a case. Marcus stopped by that evening while I was organizing files. 17 years old, sharp as a tack, with computer skills that made my military training look like stone tools. Kid had been helping his mom Sarah manage their HOA paperwork since he was 14. "Mr. Thornfield, my mom wanted me to thank you for what happened today. Word's already getting around about the inspector thing." "How's your mom holding up with the fee situation?" His face darkened. "She's been skipping lunch at work to save money. Won't tell me, but I see the empty lunch bags." He hesitated. "Mrs. Blackwell came by our place yesterday. Said if we can't afford community standards, maybe we should consider selling." That comment hit like a cold slap. I'd seen enough bullies in the Marines to recognize the pattern. Isolate, intimidate, eliminate. "Marcus, you're good with computers, right? How would you feel about helping me research some historical property records?" His eyes lit up like Christmas morning. "You mean like detective work?" "Exactly like detective work, because I think Grandpa left us a roadmap to take down Mrs. Blackwell's operation. The kid practically vibrated with excitement. "When do we start?" That night, organizing Grandpa's meticulous files, I couldn't shake the feeling he'd been preparing me for this fight long before he died. Every childhood visit where he'd taught me to read the land, every story about standing up to bullies, every careful lesson about protecting what matters. Vivian thought she was dealing with some unemployed veteran who'd fold under pressure. She was about to learn that Marines don't retreat. We reload. And thanks to Grandpa's research, I had plenty of ammunition. By week 8, Vivian had escalated to psychological warfare. 2 security guards in matching polo shirts started patrolling the waterfront every morning at 6 a.m. The sound of their heavy boots on wooden planks echoed across still water like distant thunder, turning peaceful sunrise into daily intimidation. Professional muscle with cameras, documenting every resident's movement. "Community Safety Patrol," Vivian announced at the emergency HOA meeting she'd called. "Recent incidents require enhanced security measures." What incidents? Nobody could say. But suddenly every neighbor felt like they were living in a prison camp. The guards made their presence known, standing at property lines with telephoto lenses, following elderly Dolores to her mailbox, parking outside Sarah's house when she left for her double shifts. The metallic click of camera shutters became the neighborhood's new soundtrack. Constant, threatening, inescapable. Then the newspaper hit like a slap to the face. "Local squatter threatens property values," screamed from the Millbrook Tribune's front page. Anonymous sources described a potentially dangerous individual with military background and unstable behavior occupying lakefront property. The article painted me as some kind of armed hermit terrorizing peaceful families. Reading those lies, the bitter taste of betrayal filled my mouth. Whoever fed this story knew details only someone close could know. My service record, unemployment status, even my questions about HOA finances. Marcus found me that afternoon, laptop bag slung over his shoulder, looking like he'd discovered buried treasure. "Mr. Thornfield, you need to see this." He spread his computer on Grandpa's kitchen table, fingers flying across keys. "I've been digging through property records all week. Mrs. Blackwell's been real busy the last 15 years. On screen, a pattern that made my blood run cold. Foreclosures, forced sales, property acquisitions, all around Millbrook Lake, all targeting families who'd fallen behind on HOA fees. 6 houses in the last decade, Marcus explained, scrolling through transaction records. Always the same pattern. Fees get raised, families struggle, then legal action forces them out. She buys the properties cheap through shell companies, flips them for triple the price. I remembered Grandpa once telling me about neighbors who'd moved away suddenly, families who'd lived here for generations, gone overnight. I'd assumed they'd found better opportunities. Reality was much darker. That's when Marcus dropped the real bombshell. But here's the crazy part. He pulled up email correspondence buried in public records. She's not working alone. Lakeshire Development Corporation. Email chains discussing community improvement opportunities and strategic resident displacement. The company specialized in luxury lakefront resorts, and they'd been coordinating with Vivian for years. The acrid smell of overheating laptop mixed with coffee brewing in Grandpa's ancient percolator as we pieced together the conspiracy. Every forced sale had preceded development proposals to the county. Vivian wasn't just stealing fees, she was systematically clearing properties for corporate takeover. "Look at these payment records," Marcus said, voice tight with excitement. "Lakeshire's been paying her consulting fees of $50,000 per successful acquisition." My grandfather's old military training kicked in. Always verify intelligence before acting. I'd learned from his meticulous documentation habits that paper trails don't lie, but you had to dig deep enough to find the truth. "Can you access current HOA financial records?" Marcus's fingers paused over the keyboard. "That's weird. Everything from 2020 onward has been archived or restricted, like someone specifically requested limited access." That evening, gentle knocking interrupted my research. Dolores stood at my door, hands shaking, constantly glancing toward the security guards stationed at the boat launch. "Jasper, honey, I need to tell you something." Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "Those security men came to my house today." The cold fury building in my chest felt familiar. Same feeling I'd get overseas when corrupt officials threatened innocent civilians. What did they want? Said they had reports of me interfering with community operations by talking to you. Tears gathered in her eyes. Told me elderly residents who cause trouble might face enhanced scrutiny of their properties. The rough texture of anger gripped my throat. Dolores, I can't afford any more fees, Jasper. If they find violations, if they force me out. She broke down completely. This house is all I have left of my husband. After she left, I sat on Grandpa's dock watching sunset paint the lake in shades of orange and gold. The evening air carried pine scent mixed with something chemical, fresh spray paint where security guards had marked property boundaries like territorial animals. This wasn't about money anymore. Vivian was using terror tactics to control an entire community. But she'd made one critical mistake. Marcus had found the backup database, and thanks to Grandpa's Historical Society credentials, I had legitimate access to request those missing records. Vivian thought she'd buried the evidence. Instead, she'd just made it easier to hang herself. Week 12 brought Vivian's most vicious attack yet. I woke to find my dock vandalized, support cables cut, railings loosened, and unsafe structure spray-painted in red letters across the planks. The sharp smell of industrial paint mixed with morning lake mist, creating a toxic cocktail that made my eyes water. But that was just her opening move. By noon, anonymous flyers appeared in every mailbox around the lake. Dangerous veteran threatens community safety with a grainy photo of me taken through my kitchen window. The text described erratic behavior, weapons stockpiling, and mental instability. Character assassination designed to isolate me from any community support. Sarah knocked on my door that afternoon, flyer crumpled in her fist, anger blazing in her eyes. "This is disgusting." She waved the paper like evidence in a murder trial. "I don't know you well, but Marcus thinks the world of you. Anyone who helps my son with calculus homework at 10 p.m. isn't some crazy person." Marcus appeared behind her, laptop bag slung over his shoulder and excitement written across his face. "Mr. Thornfield, I found something huge. But first, did you know your grandfather had a safety deposit box?" I stared at him. "What safety deposit box?" "Bank manager called this morning, said you inherited access to box 847 at Millbrook First National, been wondering why you hadn't claimed it yet." Marcus practically vibrated with anticipation. Guy sounded nervous, like he was sitting on dynamite. My pulse quickened. Grandpa had never mentioned a safety deposit box, but then again the man had kept secrets like a Cold War spy. The bank manager, Peterson, led us to the vault with the attitude of someone revealing state secrets. The metallic clang of the security gate echoed off concrete walls as he inserted his master key, hands shaking slightly. "Your grandfather was very specific about this box," Peterson whispered, constantly glancing around like Vivian might materialize from thin air. "Made me promise to call his heir if there were ever property disputes involving the HOA. Honestly, I was starting to think Grandpa had been part psychic, part lawyer, and part fortune teller. The man had predicted this fight with surgical precision. The box contained documents that made my hands shake. Original deeds, water rights transfers, and legal papers dating back over a century. But one document stopped my heart, a reversion clause buried in the 1892 dam construction agreement. "Marcus, when did the old mill stop generating power?" He was already Googling. 1978. Dam's been used only for flood control since then. The implications crashed over me like a tidal wave. The reversion clause was crystal clear. If the dam ever ceased commercial operation, water rights returned to the original families. But I couldn't process the full legal ramifications because Peterson was still talking. "Mr. Thornfield, there's something else. Mrs. Blackwell called yesterday asking about your grandfather's banking records. Offered to pay for estate consultation services." Ice formed in my stomach. "What did you tell her?" "Nothing, of course. Banking confidentiality, but she seemed very eager to know if he'd left anything besides the cabin." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Mentioned she was concerned about community security and potential legal complications." Vivian knew something was coming. She could sense the walls closing in. That evening, Marcus and I spread documents across Grandpa's kitchen table like war plans. The rough texture of century-old paper contrasted with the smooth surface of his laptop as we organized evidence. "This is bigger than dock fees," Marcus said, studying the papers with the focus of a chess master. "Way bigger." The sound of gravel crunching outside interrupted our work. Through the window, Vivian's Range Rover pulled into my driveway. headlights cutting through darkness like searchlights. She emerged with two men in expensive suits. Lawyers, from their predatory swagger. The metallic slam of car doors echoed across the water like gunshots announcing war. Her knock was aggressive, demanding. When I opened the door, her smile was sharp enough to perform surgery. "Mr. Thornfield, we need to discuss your continued violations." Her voice carried the confidence of someone holding a royal flush. "I'm afraid we'll be filing criminal trespassing charges if you don't vacate within 48 hours. "On what grounds?" "Unlawful occupation of community waterfront. This lake belongs to all residents, not individual squatters." She gestured to her legal team. "We have documentation proving your grandfather had no legitimate claim to exclusive waterfront access." I looked at her calmly, thinking about the papers spread across my kitchen table, about Grandpa's meticulous planning, about justice served cold as lake water in January. "Vivian, you might want to reconsider that position." Something in my tone made her hesitate. For just a moment, absolute confidence flickered. "What do you mean?" I smiled, thinking about tomorrow's emergency HOA meeting and the nuclear surprise waiting in that safety deposit box. "Guess you'll find out at the meeting." The next morning, Marcus and I returned to the bank vault like archaeologists uncovering ancient treasure. Peterson's hands shook as he unlocked box 847 again. The metallic scrape of the key turning echoed off concrete walls, and I swear the man was sweating despite the vault's refrigerated air. This time I examined every document with the methodical precision the Marines had drilled into me. What I'd missed yesterday in excitement now blazed with crystal clarity. The 1892 dam construction deed wasn't a simple land sale. It was a masterpiece of legal strategy. My great-great-grandfather Silas Thornfield had sold the land but retained something infinitely more valuable. The reversion clause read like poetry written by a lawyer with a crystal ball. Should commercial power generation cease at any time, all riparian rights, water usage privileges, and lakebed ownership shall revert in perpetuity to the Thornfield family line. Marcus leaned over my shoulder, his breath forming small clouds in the cold vault air. "Mr. Thornfield, it means we own the lake. All of it." My voice sounded strange in the confined space, like I was announcing the discovery of oil under my backyard. But the real nuclear bomb lay in the next document, a 1987 purchase agreement where Grandpa had quietly bought water rights from 3 other original families. Cash transactions, legal transfers, all properly recorded but buried in county archives. The sellers had no idea what they were giving up. Grandpa knew exactly what he was buying. For 36 years, every dock post hammered into the lakebed had been driven into Thornfield property. Every community structure built over our water. Every boat moored to HOA docks was anchored on our lake bottom. Vivian had been running a 15-year protection racket on someone else's property. Peterson handed me a sealed envelope with trembling fingers. "Your grandfather left specific instructions about this." Inside, Grandpa's final message in his careful handwriting. "Jasper, I bought these rights not for profit, but to protect our neighbors from corporate vultures. Use this power wisely. The lake belongs to the community in spirit, but someone must guard it from those who would exploit it. Make me proud. Grandpa." The weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders like a rucksack loaded with C4. I could charge every resident rent. I could evict anyone. I could sell everything to Lakeshore Development and retire rich. Or I could honor Grandpa's real legacy. Marcus was calculating on his laptop, and the numbers made my stomach turn. 15 years of dock fees, 37 households, plus special assessments. Mr. Thornfield, she's stolen over $800,000. 800 grand, from elderly folks choosing between medication and dock fees, from single mothers working double shifts, from families who trusted their HOA president to act in their best interests. The faint smell of old paper and bank vault disinfectant suddenly seemed overwhelming. This wasn't just about property rights anymore. This was about justice for an entire community. Marcus, we're not just exposing theft tonight. We're revealing something that'll change everything. When residents learned Vivian had been charging fees for using someone else's property, fees with no legal basis whatsoever, they'd demand blood. When they discovered her Lakeshore Development deals, her systematic targeting of vulnerable families, her decade-plus embezzlement scheme, they'd want her head on a pike. Honestly, I was starting to feel like Batman discovering he'd inherited Wayne Enterprises. Except instead of fighting crime in Gotham, I was about to expose HOA corruption in Michigan. Tonight's meeting wasn't about dock violations or community standards. It was about revealing that the emperor had no clothes, and I held the deed to her entire kingdom. Vivian thought she was forcing a showdown over pocket change. She'd picked a fight with the actual king of the lake. The next 3 days became a masterclass in strategic warfare preparation. First priority, building an ironclad case that even Vivian's high-priced lawyers couldn't challenge. Marcus and I transformed Grandpa's cabin into mission control. Documents spread across every surface, whiteboards covered in timelines, and the constant hum of 3 printers working overtime. The musty smell of century-old paper mixed with fresh ink and strong coffee, creating the perfect aroma of revolution. We need witnesses who can testify about Vivian's tactics, I told Marcus while organizing deed copies into color-coded folders. That's when sweet old Dolores revealed her true nature. Part librarian, part FBI agent, and entirely pissed off. "I've been documenting that witch for 15 years, she said, marching into my cabin with banker's boxes that looked like they could convict a war criminal. Every illegal fee, every harassment campaign, every family she's driven away. Her kitchen table transformation was beautiful to behold. Manila folders labeled by year, photocopies of threatening letters, and, the real treasure, audio recordings of HOA meetings where Vivian had made spectacularly damaging statements. Here's her saying the lake needs better demographics, Dolores said, playing a recording with the satisfaction of someone dropping a smoking gun, and this one where she discusses encouraging voluntary departures of elderly residents. Pure gold. Honestly, Dolores could have run surveillance operations for the CIA. We recruited Sarah next. Her nursing background made her perfect for documenting the human cost of Vivian's financial terrorism. The metallic click of her clipboard sounded like justice being served as she cataloged medical crises caused by HOA fee stress. Mrs. Patterson down the shore delayed calling 911 during her heart attack because she was worried about bills on top of HOA assessments, Sarah reported, consulting notes organized with military precision. Mr. Henry's been rationing insulin to afford dock fees. This isn't community management, it's systematic elder abuse. But Marcus proved to be our technical secret weapon. The kid didn't just find evidence, he created a digital presentation that would make Silicon Valley executives weep with envy. Interactive maps, financial flowcharts, and timeline animations that told the story of 15 years of systematic theft. "Check this out," Marcus said, projecting his work onto the cabin wall. His fingers flew across the keyboard like a pianist hitting every note. I cross-referenced property sales with fee increases. Every time someone questioned Mrs. Blackwell's authority, their assessments mysteriously doubled within 60 days. Classic retaliation pattern with mathematical precision. While we built the legal case, I focused on the physical setup for maximum psychological impact. Grandpa's original surveying equipment, brass theodolite steel measuring chains and hand-carved plotting stakes, would provide visual proof of historical property boundaries. I spent hours practicing with the antique instruments, muscle memory returning from childhood lessons with Grandpa about reading the land. The cold brass of the theodolite and rough texture of century-old surveying chain connected me to generations of Thornfield men who'd protected this property from exploitation. But Sarah's nursing connections proved most valuable for organizing community response. She knew every family's struggles, every medical crisis caused by financial pressure, every elderly resident choosing between medications and assessments. "People are terrified but also furious," she reported after a day of door-to-door conversations. "Everyone has horror stories, but they've been isolated and afraid. Once they realize they're not alone," Marcus suggested live streaming tomorrow's meeting. "If this goes viral, Mrs. Blackwell can't bury it later. Public pressure amplifies everything." Smart kid. We set up multiple camera angles, backup recording devices, and direct social media feeds. Whatever happened tomorrow would be preserved for internet eternity. The technical aspects were crucial. For live streaming, you need redundant internet connections, multiple power sources, and backup recording devices. Technology fails at the worst moments, so preparation means assuming everything will break and planning accordingly. That evening, I walked Grandpa's dock one final time, organizing thoughts like ammunition before battle. The gentle sound of water lapping against weathered posts mixed with distant loons calling across darkening water. Tomorrow, this peaceful scene would become a battlefield. Vivian's security guards had been conspicuously absent for 2 days. probably preparing for tomorrow's enforcement action against my supposed trespassing. Perfect. Let them come with their cameras and clipboards and legal threats. I had 40 years of documentation, 3 generations of legal ownership, and a community ready to revolt against systematic theft. More importantly, I had Grandpa's moral clarity about right versus wrong, justice versus exploitation. The plan was elegant. Let Vivian make her accusations about illegal occupation, then systematically destroy every lie with documented evidence. When she claimed authority over community property, I'd reveal true ownership. When she justified her fees, I'd expose the embezzlement. Tomorrow wasn't just about exposing one corrupt official. It was about demonstrating what happens when regular people organize, research, and fight institutional bullies with intelligence instead of anger. Vivian wanted a public confrontation to force my submission. She was about to receive a public education about consequences. The morning of the HOA meeting, Vivian launched her most desperate attack yet. I woke to red and blue lights strobing through my bedroom windows and the heavy sound of boots on gravel. 3 county sheriff's cruisers in my driveway, legal notice taped to my door with the aggressive precision of a declaration of war. Emergency restraining order, cease and desist all harassment activities, signed by Judge Morrison, Vivian's golf buddy who'd probably rubber-stamped this without reading a word. Deputy Collins, decent guy I'd known since high school, looked like he'd rather be directing traffic than serving this garbage. Sorry, Jasper. Got orders to escort you off the property pending resolution of ownership disputes. His voice carried the embarrassment of a man forced to enforce obvious corruption. You've got 30 minutes to pack essentials. The metallic taste of pure fury flooded my mouth. Vivian had played her trump card, weaponizing corrupt connections to criminalize my presence on my own property just hours before the meeting. But she'd made one beautiful mistake. Marcus emerged from the tree line like some kind of teenage digital ninja, laptop bag slung over his shoulder, and a grin that could power the entire county. Mr. Thornfield, you need to see this before you go anywhere. His screen showed social media explosion. Hat Millbrook scam trending nationally. Our preparation videos had been weaponized into viral ammunition. Vivian's recorded statements about encouraging departures of elderly residents. Financial charts showing systematic theft. Dolores's testimony about medical emergencies caused by HOA terrorism. 60,000 shares in 3 hours, Marcus reported with barely contained excitement. CNN just picked up the story. Local news stations are fighting over exclusive interviews. The sharp scent of morning coffee from his thermos mixed with diesel fumes from idling police cars, creating the perfect aroma of justice brewing. Even better, Marcus had live-streamed this morning's sheriff's visit. Comments poured in from viewers nationwide expressing outrage at obvious corruption, real-time democracy in action. Deputy Collins peered over Marcus's shoulder, his expression shifting from embarrassment to horror. Jesus Christ, Jasper, is this stuff actually true? Every documented word. Tonight's meeting will prove it all. That's when Sarah arrived with nuclear reinforcements. Channel 7 investigative team just set up at the community center, she announced breathlessly, practically glowing with excitement. Producer says they've been tracking HOA corruption statewide. Your situation is the smoking gun they've been hunting. But here's where Vivian's panic became comedy gold. My phone buzzed with an unknown number. When I answered, Vivian's voice cracked like a teenager asking someone to prom. Mr. Thornfield, perhaps we should discuss a reasonable settlement before tonight's unpleasantness. Honestly, listening to her grovel after months of arrogant threats was better than Christmas morning. What kind of settlement, Vivian? Full dismissal of all fees and assessments. Clean slate. In exchange, you withdraw allegations and maintain confidentiality about community financial matters. The desperation dripping from her tone was absolutely delicious. She'd gone from demanding my eviction to begging for silence in less than 12 hours. Counteroffer, I said with the calm of someone holding 4 aces. Full restitution to all residents, immediate resignation, and public confession of fraud. Take it or leave it. Long pause. When she spoke again, her mask finally slipped completely. You're making a serious mistake. There are powerful people involved in this development. People who don't appreciate interference with legitimate business interests. Ah, there it was. The threat she'd been saving. Lakeshore development muscle, probably including financial pressure on local officials like Judge Morrison. Vivian, you picked a fight with a Marine veteran who legally owns the lake you've been stealing from. Exactly how did you think this would end? The line went dead with a satisfying click. Deputy Collins handed me the restraining order with obvious reluctance. Jasper, I have to enforce this bullshit, but maybe lawyer up and file countercharges. This whole thing reeks worse than dead fish. As police cars pulled away, Marcus coordinated our media strategy with military efficiency. Channel 7 wants exclusive pre-meeting interview. Plus, I've connected with 3 other communities fighting similar corruption. They're sending representatives to witness tonight. But Dolores delivered the real masterstroke. She'd spent all morning contacting families Vivian had destroyed over the years. Former residents who'd lost homes to fabricated violations and escalating fees. They were driving in from across Michigan to witness tonight's reckoning. The coarse texture of legal documents reminded me we'd transcended simple neighborhood disputes. This was now public accountability with statewide implications. Vivian thought intimidation and legal manipulation would silence truth. Instead, she'd triggered a media firestorm that would expose HOA corruption far beyond Millbrook shores. The restraining order couldn't keep me from tonight's public meeting, and it sure as hell couldn't stop the truth from obliterating her 15-year crime spree. 2 hours before the meeting, Vivian made her final, most desperate play. The acrid smell of smoke pulled me from the community center parking lot where I'd been setting up equipment with Marcus. Black clouds billowed from the direction of my cabin, and my heart dropped into my stomach like a stone. Fire trucks screamed past us, sirens wailing across the lake. By the time we reached Grandpa's property, the dock was fully engulfed, orange flames reflecting off dark water like hell's own mirror. "Electrical fire," announced Fire Chief Reynolds, though his expression suggested he wasn't buying his own words. "Faulty wiring in the dock's power system. These old structures can be real hazards." Convenient timing. Hours before the meeting that would expose Vivian's crimes, my dock, the physical symbol of our family's water rights, goes up in smoke. But Vivian had underestimated both technology and teenage determination. "Mr. Thornfield," Marcus whispered, pulling me aside while firefighters worked. "I've been recording everything with hidden cameras since yesterday. Got the whole thing." His laptop screen showed crystal clear footage, 2 figures in dark clothing pouring accelerant on dock supports at 3 a.m. When they turned toward the camera, enhanced lighting revealed faces that made my blood boil. Vivian's security guards, the same muscle who'd been intimidating residents for months. "Already uploaded to cloud storage," Marcus said with satisfaction. Plus sent copies to Channel 7, State Police, and about 6 social media accounts. The metallic taste of justice mixed with smoke-filled air as I watched our evidence compound in real time. But Vivian wasn't finished. While we documented the arson, she launched a coordinated character assassination campaign designed to destroy my credibility before tonight's revelations. Anonymous social media accounts flooded local Facebook groups with fabricated stories about my dangerous mental state and violent threats against community leaders. Photos of me taken with telephoto lenses, edited to look menacing. Fake testimonials from concerned neighbors describing erratic behavior. The digital lynch mob was professionally orchestrated, too coordinated for amateur work. Lakeshore Development had clearly hired crisis management specialists to contain the damage. Sarah called with updates that made my jaw clench. "They're spreading rumors that you threatened Dolores. Said you've been pressuring elderly residents to lie for you. Some people are actually believing it." The rough texture of burned dockwood under my fingertips reminded me how far Vivian would go to protect her operation. Arson, character assassination, professional smear campaigns. But her desperation was creating unforced errors. Channel 7's investigative reporter, Janet Morrison, arrived with camera crew and barely contained excitement. "Mr. Thornfield, we've been monitoring the social media attacks against you. The metadata shows they're all coming from the same IP addresses, traced to a public relations firm in Detroit. Professional crisis management firms leave digital fingerprints, and paying for coordinated defamation campaigns suggested guilt beyond reasonable doubt. Plus," Janet continued, "we just received leaked emails between Vivian Blackwell and Lakeshore Development discussing reputation management and resident compliance strategies. Someone inside their operation is feeding us information." The tide was turning. Vivian's scorched earth tactics were backfiring spectacularly, but the real nuclear bomb dropped when Dolores called with news that made my heart race. "Jasper, honey, you need to know. That fire chief, he's Vivian's brother-in-law. Been doing contracting work for Lakeshore Development. The fix was in from the beginning. Corruption deeper than I'd imagined. Local fire department, sheriff's office, even the judge, all compromised by development money and personal connections. Marcus was already documenting everything, his laptop humming with investigative fury. I'm mapping all the connections. Vivian's not just stealing from residents. She's the center of a whole corrupt network. As evening approached, the burned dock continued smoldering, sending acrid smoke across the lake like a signal fire announcing war. But instead of intimidating me, the destruction had strengthened our position. Vivian's arson provided visual evidence of her desperation. The character assassination campaign proved professional coordination with development interests. The corrupt investigation revealed systemic problems beyond simple HOA theft. What started as a property dispute had evolved into exposing institutional corruption throughout the county. An hour before the meeting, my phone buzzed with one final call from Vivian. Her voice was barely controlled hysteria. "You have no idea what you're destroying. This development project employs hundreds of people, brings millions in tax revenue. You're sabotaging the entire community's economic future over petty grievances." Petty grievances? You've been stealing from elderly folks for 15 years. I've been managing community resources for sustainable growth. Your grandfather's obsession with those worthless documents is preventing progress. The mask was completely off now. No more pretense about community service or legitimate fees. Pure corporate greed disguised as civic duty. "See you at the meeting, Vivian." Tonight wouldn't just expose one corrupt official. It would demonstrate what happens when corporate interests try to steamroll communities through systematic theft and intimidation. The burned dock would be rebuilt. Her criminal enterprise would not. The community center parking lot looked like a media circus had collided with a town hall revolution. Channel 7's satellite truck dominated the entrance, while cars with license plates from across Michigan filled every available space. Former Millbrook residents who'd been driven out by Vivian's schemes had returned for justice. The air buzzed with electricity, not just from television equipment, but from a community finally ready to fight back. Inside, the meeting room was packed beyond capacity. Folding chairs lined every wall, people stood 3 deep in the back, and overflow crowds gathered outside watching live streams on their phones. The musty smell of old community center mixed with nervous sweat and anticipation, thick enough to cut with a knife. Vivian sat at the front table flanked by 3 expensive lawyers, her usual confidence replaced by the rigid posture of someone trying not to show panic. Her diamond bracelets caught fluorescent light as her hands shook slightly, arranging papers that couldn't possibly save her now. At exactly 7 p.m., she called the meeting to order with a voice that cracked like breaking glass. "We're here to address baseless allegations made by a disgruntled individual who's been harassing our community for months." She gestured toward me like I was something toxic. "Mr. Thornfield's claims about property ownership are completely fraudulent, and tonight we'll set the record straight." That's when I stood up, feeling every eye in the room lock on to me. "Vivian, before you continue, I have a question." My voice carried clearly to the back of the packed room. "Who exactly controls these docks?" Her face went white as notebook paper. Around the room, people leaned forward. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. I pulled out the original 1892 deed, holding it high enough for the news cameras to capture. This document shows that my family has owned the water rights to this entire lake since 1978, when the dam stopped commercial operation and the reversion clause took effect. The room erupted, voices rising in confusion, anger, and sudden understanding. Vivian's lawyer whispered frantically in her ear while camera flashes lit the room like lightning. "For 15 years, I continued, my voice cutting through the chaos, "every dock fee you've collected has been theft. You've been charging my neighbors for access to my property." "That's impossible!" Vivian shot to her feet. "This lake belongs to the community. Your grandfather had no legal claim to—" "Actually, he had every legal claim." I nodded to Marcus, who activated the wall projector. "And the receipts prove it." The screen filled with Grandpa's 1987 water rights purchase agreements, legal documents showing he'd bought additional riparian rights from 3 other original families. County clerk stamps proving everything was properly recorded. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, "meet the actual owner of Millbrook Lake, my grandfather, who's been dead for 4 months while this woman continued collecting fees for property she never owned." The silence that followed was deafening. You could hear camera motors whirring, people breathing, the soft hum of fluorescent lights. Then the explosion of voices as the implications hit home. $800,000, Marcus announced, advancing to the next slide showing financial analysis. That's how much Mrs. Blackwell has stolen from this community over 15 years. Vivian's face cycled through emotions like a broken slot machine. Denial, anger, desperation, defeat. This is all fabricated. These documents could be forged. That's when Dolores stood up in the front row, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd lived through 8 decades of bullshit. Honey, I watched your grandfather research every one of those documents for 20 years. He knew exactly what Vivian was doing, and he was preparing for this day. The crowd's mood shifted from confusion to fury as understanding dawned. Elderly residents realizing they'd been choosing between medication and illegal fees. Families understanding they'd nearly lost homes to fabricated violations. But the real knockout punch came when Janet Morrison from Channel 7 stood up with microphone in hand. Mrs. Blackwell, how do you respond to evidence that you've been coordinating with Lakeshore Development to systematically remove long-term residents for luxury resort construction? The projector screen filled with leaked emails discussing strategic displacement and demographic improvement around the lake. Vivian's own words describing elderly residents as obstacles to community enhancement. The room exploded in outrage. People shouting, cameras flashing, reporters scribbling frantically. Vivian's lawyers were packing briefcases like the building was on fire. In the chaos, I delivered the line I'd been preparing for months. Vivian, you asked who controls these docks. The answer is simple. The community does. And starting today, that's exactly how it's going to work. State investigators who'd been quietly observing from the back stepped forward with handcuffs, fraud charges, embezzlement, conspiracy, the works. As they led Vivian away in restraints, the community center erupted in applause that shook windows and rattled rafters. Justice, served cold as lake water in January. 3 months later, Millbrook Lake looked like a completely different place. The burned dock had been rebuilt, not just mine, but every deteriorating structure around the lake. Real community maintenance funded by recovered stolen money and managed by a democratically elected board that actually served residents instead of exploiting them. I kept my promise about community ownership. Working with a property lawyer who specialized in conservation easements, we established the Millbrook Lake Community Trust. I donated the water rights to the trust with ironclad protections against future development and a charter requiring transparent democratic management. The new dock fees? $30 monthly for actual maintenance costs, down from Vivian's $300 extortion racket. The difference meant elderly residents like Dolores could afford their medications. Single mothers like Sarah could work normal hours instead of killing themselves with double shifts. It feels like our neighborhood again, Dolores told me last week while we shared morning coffee on the rebuilt community pier. People talk to each other now instead of hiding from HOA harassment. The legal aftermath was swift and satisfying. Vivian pled guilty to fraud and embezzlement, receiving 5 years in prison plus restitution orders that would keep her broke for decades. Her co-conspirators at Lakeshore Development faced federal charges for conspiracy and bribery. Judge Morrison quietly retired after ethics investigations revealed his corruption. But the best revenge was what we built from the ashes of her criminal enterprise. The recovered $800,000 in stolen fees funded the Ezekiel Thornfield Memorial Scholarship, $5,000 annually for environmental studies students committed to community conservation. Marcus was our first recipient, heading to Michigan State to study environmental law with plans to return and protect the lake from future threats. Every Saturday morning, the community pier hosts what we call healing water sessions for veterans dealing with PTSD. The gentle sound of water lapping against rebuilt docks provides natural therapy, while guys like me share stories and support each other. Turns out Grandpa's peaceful lake was exactly what we all needed. Sarah started the Millbrook Digital Literacy Program, teaching elderly residents computer skills to protect themselves from online scams and digital harassment. She says helping neighbors fight technology-based intimidation feels like community self-defense training. The Historical Preservation Project became Marcus's ongoing mission. We've digitized every document from Grandpa's collection, creating a public database of local property records that prevents future fraud. Other communities across Michigan have requested copies to protect themselves from similar HOA corruption, but the ripple effects extended far beyond our little lake. Our viral documentation of Vivian's crimes inspired dozens of other communities to investigate their own HOA corruption. Channel 7's investigative series won a regional Emmy Award and triggered state legislation strengthening oversight of community association finances. The smell of pine trees and clean lake water, no more diesel fumes from Vivian's oversized SUV, reminds me every morning why this fight mattered. We didn't just expose corruption. We proved that regular people can organize, research, and defeat institutional bullies when they work together. Property values actually increased after Vivian's removal. Turns out families prefer living in communities with legitimate democratic governance instead of fear-based autocracy. Who knew? Last month brought news that validated every sleepless night of document research. The Michigan Attorney General cited our case as a model for community-based fraud detection, and the FBI requested our methods for investigating HOA corruption nationwide. Grandpa's legacy wasn't just the lake he protected. It was the lesson that democracy requires constant vigilance against people who exploit trust for personal gain. Every childhood visit where he taught me to read the land was really teaching me to read power structures and fight injustice. The cabin has become unofficial community center for lake residents. Weekly potlucks, monthly board meetings, and spontaneous gatherings where neighbors actually know each other's names. The rough texture of the rebuilt dock reminds everyone that communities grow stronger when they face challenges together. Yesterday, I received a call from desperate homeowners in neighboring Washtenaw County. Their HOA president is demanding $50,000 in emergency assessments while threatening property seizures. Familiar pattern, familiar corruption. Time to share what we learned about fighting back.
And that's how Jasper Thornfield went from facing eviction at gunpoint to pulling an $800,000 theft scheme run by his own HOA president. But here's what really matters in this story. Jasper didn't win because he got lucky or he hired expensive lawyers. He won because he did his homework while his enemies were busy making threats. While Vivian was busy playing power games, intimidating elderly neighbors, Jasper was quietly building an ironclad case with century-old documents she never knew existed. This story proves that when regular people refuse to be intimidated by bullies with clipboards, even the most entrenched corruption can be brought down. Documentation beats intimidation every time. Knowledge is power and preparation is everything. I know many of you have faced similar HOA situations. Bogus fine, made-up violations, HOA board members who think they are running kingdoms instead of serving communities. You are not powerless, and you're definitely not alone in this fight. What's the most outrageous thing HOA have ever tried to pull on you? Drop it in the comments and the best stories become our next investigations. Hit subscribe if you believe that communities should be run by democracy, not dictatorship. Because bullies count on innocent people staying silent and don't give them that satisfaction.